Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. I'm your host, Kerry Parker. Today we have episode 424 for April 14th, 2025. Happy tax day to those in the U.S. Hopefully you're done, but if not, clock's ticking. You got to get that done. So we have an interview show for you today. But before we get to that, a couple quick notes. First of all, the new Patron promotion is live. Started last week. It will run till the end of this month, April. And I haven't done one since, I think, last April. So I should do this probably at least twice a year. But anyway, I haven't. So now is a chance to snag one of those highly collectible, super cool, security-enhancing Dragon Challenge coins. And these coins really are cool. If you haven't seen one, you should definitely check it out. I won't go through all of it again here, but go to fdsd.me. That's, FDSD as in Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. fdsd.me/promo425 for all the details. 425 is in April of 2025. So all the information is there. Of course, there's a link in the show notes. And one quick note about last week, one little correction, I think. Nobody called this out, but and honestly, it doesn't matter that much. But I think last week I said Volt Typhoon when I meant Salt Typhoon. Yeah, I know. Maybe it doesn't matter, but I like to be accurate. So anyway, if you're curious about that, either of those, you can go to the web and search on them. Wikipedia's got articles. But they were two different campaigns with two very different implications in terms of national security. Both a big deal, but in different ways. Okay, so as I said, we have an interview for you today. We're going to be talking with Oz Jones. Oz is what we like to call a blue teamer in the InfoSec world. There's blue team and red team, and then there's purple teams, and we give colors to things. But this is kind of like blue good, red bad, or maybe, blue defenders, red attackers. And we talk a lot on this show about data breaches or services that were compromised or agencies that were broken into, ransomware, all these kind of things. And it's kind of easy to, Monday morning quarterback that and say they're bad because they screwed up. But I actually try not to be that reductive about it because it's a lot more nuanced than that. But I thought it would be good if we actually talk to somebody whose job it is to try to defend against these attacks, because there are a lot of attacks. In my book, I like to say they are myriad and legion. There's a lot of them, and they vary wildly in both style, sophistication, or what we like to call TTP, tactics, techniques, and procedures. And so I thought, wouldn't it be good to actually look at this from the business perspective and find out why it's so difficult to protect this stuff and the kind of things that we need to do. And look, even if you're not a business owner, or maybe you're not, in your company's security or IT department, I think it's really important to understand what these companies are faced with and what sort of tools they have to defend themselves. Whenever you hear of a data breach at some company, these are the defenses that were somehow foiled or circumvented. And this explains why it's so hard to protect our data and online services that we depend on. I think I say this in the interview too, but the defenders have to be right all the time. They can't ever fail. The bad guys only have to succeed once, and then you hear about it on the news. So I try to be fair about this. I don't usually think it's productive to blame companies for falling victim to cyber attacks, because anybody can fall victim to an attack. And after the show, I'll actually talk a little bit about something that happened to Troy Hunt recently, who's the owner of a site called Have I Been Pwned. So anyway, it's not uncommon, to be a victim of an attack. So unless you don't even try to take some common sense, basic precautions, which we're going to be talking about today, we shouldn't really beat up on companies for making a mistake. Now, we should expect them to be transparent and forthright about what happened, with timely communication to the victims, and some proper and sincere amount of contrition. And they should be doing their best to remediate any damage and, certainly learn from mistakes. So anyway, we will get into that, but I wanted to kind of set the stage for this, because even if this is going to be kind of from the perspective of the cyber defenses of a company, but even if you're not a company owner, I think it's still instructive to understand what they have to go through so that the next time these things happen, kind of what they were up against. So we do throw out several little bits of jargon through this interview. So just real quick, let me kind of go through a quick lingo dictionary. We talk about the CIA triad. That's a common security trope about confidentiality, integrity, and availability. We talk about SOCs, SOCs, or Security Operations Centers. They're responsible for protecting an organization against cyber threats. We talk very briefly about what's called a split tunnel VPN. That is a VPN where not all the traffic goes to the virtual private network. You actually configure it so that, maybe I want my work traffic to go through the VPN, but want my personal traffic not to. That would be a split tunnel VPN. We talk about SaaS, and that is short for SaaS, or Software as a Service. And the whole as a service thing is a very, very big marketing buzzword. You'll hear all sorts of things that start off with some letter and then AAS. Ransomware as a service, software as a service, platform as a service. There's a bunch of these marketing terms. We talk about left and right of boom. In this case, boom is like the incident, like when you get hacked. So on a timeline, left of boom is before it happened, right of boom is after it happened. You generally want to put a lot of effort to go left of boom and then not have a boom. But that's what we're talking about when we say that. We talk about an IDS, or an intrusion detection system. We talk about various DR things, MDR, EDR, XDR. These are all types of detection and response systems. And then finally, we talk about IOCs, or indicators of compromise. So yeah, these are, this is cybersecurity lingo. I've mentioned some of these things before. We define maybe a couple of these as we go, but I just want to make sure before we get into it that you have some idea what they mean as these things are tossed around. Okay, let's get to our interview with Oz Jones. Oz has a diverse background, including security engineering, security operations, threat hunting, incident response, and digital forensics. I think I ran across you on LinkedIn, and I said, I got to get this guy on the show. So thanks for coming on. This is going to be a fun talk.
Awesome.
So, on this show, as any security show, I complain about data breaches and security lapses because they happen all the time. But it's easy to kind of Monday morning quarterback too. I know that it's difficult to protect against these kind of things. And so it's not easy to be a defender. Attackers only have to be successful once. Defenders always, have to have a perfect record. So that's tough. And so I know the good guys have a hard time with this, and I thought it'd be really interesting for my audience to hear what it's like from the other side, from the team trying to protect against the invaders. So let's flip the script. Let's consider the situation from the inside looking out and kind of methodically go through how companies today can protect themselves. So let's start off with the simple stuff. Tell me a little bit more about yourself, how you got maybe into cybersecurity, and in particular, how you got to helping companies beef up their security and incident response practices.
Sure. So I guess the hacker mindset was something that was in me as a child. I was always fascinated with breaking things just to see what was underneath.
Yep.
I had that itch in my brain, as Mr. Robot, the TV show, calls it. It just kept scratching, and I would want to know more. But why does it do this? And why does it do this? And what if I did this? Could I change it? Right. And I think that's where that mentality started. My first job was, other than McDonald's, was an analyst. I worked as an analyst at American Honda, and moved over to help desk, and then system engineer, network engineer, and it just morphed into security as the landscape kept changing. So yeah, I remember trying to just block users' websites and block the amount of spam emails that were coming in and all the challenges that were wrestling with that. And then it moved over to malware hitting machines, and the importance of backups became more apparent. And as everything changed, I just started evolving with it. So I kind of they call it climbing through the ranks of just IT. Because there was no security at that time. So it just kind of, I was born when it was born. And then I jumped around to different government agencies. I worked doing security engineering, network engineering, and security was always morphed into those job titles. And then I went out and just started learning. I saw that there was a big gap in security. So I went out and got a couple degrees and some certifications, and I devoured every blog and book I could get my hands on. I am a serial learner, so I'm always learning, always trying to, I'm not ever satiated when it comes to learning.
Well, and there's, cybersecurity, there's no shortage of need for people with these kind of skills today. Sadly, it's job security for us, for people in the InfoSec community. But it's good because we need people like you out there helping us out. So there's some weird things about InfoSec. Well, there's a lot of weird things, honestly. But one of the things, we always have strange color names for things. White hat, black hat, gray hat. There's actually a whole bunch of others. I had to look this up at one point. There's many different colored hats. They all have different meanings. But one of the things I want to talk about today is this notion of what we call red teaming and blue teaming. So can you help us understand what those terms mean generally, and then more specifically in the context of a company trying to secure their systems?
Sure. And I don't know how the red teaming and blue teaming colors were selected, because red teamers are typically also known as black hat, and the blue teamers are also typically known as the white hat. And the history of the black and white hat is from the Westerns. So,
the old movies with the
cowboy
good guys
would wear the
good guys wear white, right?
The bad guy. Yep. Good guys wear white. And so red teamers are the offensive side. So security is on two sides. It's defensive and offensive on that coin, and then it spreads out to all the different roles from there. But the offensive side is the ones that are trying to get in. They're trying to find the openings. They're trying to get into the environment. The blue teamers are the ones that are protecting it and defending it. So it's just like your typical castle, and castles and weapons. So you've got different weapons, and they've evolved over time, and the tactics evolved over time because they introduced like moats and gates and high walls and being built up on top of cliffs. And the weaponry also advanced, and it moved from, these huge catapults to, all different types of tactics to be able to get in the castle. And so that's the concept of red team and blue teaming, is that tactics keep changing. And it's the offensive tactics that drive the defensive. It's a reactive process. And because it's reactive, because the blue teamers don't really know what the red teamers are up to, so they can't proactively think in advance. They can't. It's difficult to be proactive as a blue teamer, unless you're a red teamer that's defending the blue team. And so that red team component is necessary to, find out how the defenses are holding up, what are the new tactics that are coming out. And the purple team is where you get the best results from that. It's that collaboration piece. So the purple team is the combination of red and blue. And you do it live. You don't do it as just we're all on the seat of our pants waiting for the red team to come in. Do we see them? Do we not? They're probably here. We haven't seen them in a week. Versus they're sitting right next to you. Okay, I'm going to try this. Tell me what you see. I see nothing. Okay, let's change our defensive. That is actually a better tactic to increasing defensive. It's the collaboration piece that's missing. And that's why a lot more visibility has been focused on purple teaming.
And to be clear, in this case, it's the red team representing potential bad guys. So this is almost like the practice squad at the football team, right? You have your offense play your own defense, before the next game to prepare and try to best the other and teach each other things, and you learn together, right?
Right. Okay.
So, in your experience, what are the most impactful? I don't want to say the worst, because it kind of depends on this. To me, there's two axes. It's how bad is it and how easy is it to pull off. So what are the most impactful cyber threats to businesses today? And I'm curious, does that vary depending on what business sector you're in, or maybe the size of the company, things like that?
Yeah. So ransomware has evolved from groups that are just kind of running it from their computer and doing it from home. It's now become operationalized. So you actually have entire groups that have developed the ransomware infrastructure and developed the malware piece for your payload, and even have a customer service piece for the help desk, and even have the virtual assistants that can actually reach out and collect the
ransomware as a service. It's crazy.
Yes. And so because of that, the barrier of entry is really low. And so now pretty much anybody can start up a ransomware operation without the knowledge of code and payloads and the infrastructure required to launch an operation. They've got these entire phishing kits that you can buy, and it comes with everything. It makes it very easy, very simple to carry on these operations. And so that's what's driving it. That's what's making it so popular. And the companies that they target, manufacturing is high. So I don't know what the stats are, something like in excess of 50, 60%. But manufacturing is high. And the reason why manufacturing is targeted is because they have a very low tolerance for downtime, which increases the likelihood of payout. So what they're looking for is the payout. So if a manufacturing company is like the meat company that was ransomware, they paid the ransom because they couldn't suffer the downtime, and they were leveraged by so many other companies. So a coverage that is like zero tolerance on downtime, leveraged by other companies, has a high revenue stream. All these things are the perfect storm for payout. And so they just see dollar signs in their eyes and they're like, okay, well, let's target them. So that's what they're looking for. They're looking for the likelihood of a high payout. So they target companies that are likely to pay.
So what about like healthcare? I would think that would be another obvious choice.
Healthcare is definitely also industry-wide as a target, but it's also that zero tolerance for zero tolerance for downtime. So that zero tolerance for downtime in healthcare, because it affects safety, it affects human life. So that also increases the likelihood to pay out. And healthcare is driven by HIPAA, and HIPAA is not meant to secure anybody. HIPAA is meant to protect the organization from liability. HIPAA was designed, it's in the acronym, it's the Health Information Portability Act. It's made to be portable.
Yeah, the P is for portability, not privacy. A lot of people get that wrong.
Right.
So it seems to me that over the years, like in the early days, regular people would worry about ransomware, and you'd hear the stories of people getting the pop-up on their PC that says, I've locked everything on your PC, send me $300 in Bitcoin to get your key back. I don't see that happening much anymore. At least maybe I don't hear about it, but it seems like it's kind of like, why do you rob banks? Because that's where the money is, right? It seems like the ransomware people have focused a lot more on the single big high-value targets instead of trying to do this kind of shotgun opportunistic thing with a whole bunch of little people and trying to get them to figure out how to buy Bitcoin and send it to you. Do you find that that's true?
Yeah, I mean it's more targeting organizations. Even the phishing campaigns itself is more targeted to organizations. I haven't really seen very many personal users get a phishing link for that type of thing, but they do target the user's personal accounts if their ultimate goal is the organization, or if the ultimate goal is the CEO of an organization. So they'll target personal accounts to gain access to that account so that it's an account of trust, because they're wanting to pivot and make a lateral movement to their ultimate target. So if there are any attacks that are to these personal accounts, it's because they're a lateral movement away from the bigger target that they're looking for.
All right, kind of establish a beachhead. And I know that we've kind of moved away from this, so maybe we can touch on this at some point, toward more of a zero trust. I know it's a buzzword thing, but in the old days, it was like they always called it the M&M defense. It was like crunchy on the outside, soft in the middle. Like once you got through the exterior and past the firewalls and such, you were golden. And I know that today, because that was such a problem, that's not true so much more. Is that right?
Yeah, I think we're advancing more on trying to beef up our defenses. It's harder to go through on the front door now, so they result to phishing campaigns, social engineering, and whatnot.
And I would imagine that we're probably doing a lot more things like compartmentalization and permissions and roles-based things where, just getting through the front door doesn't mean you can get into every room in the office, kind of in the analogy, because they've realized that they've got to compartmentalize and make sure that just because you can get into one part doesn't want to give away the whole farm, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're there with the design and conceptually, and companies are trying to head that direction, but it is still, you still see flat networks everywhere. You still see the admin accounts being utilized. You still see poor practices, but it's more like, well, we know we should do it. So now we're at that stage where we know we should do it, but in practice, it's like, well, we don't want to change because it complicates our work. It makes it, less efficient. People want to work efficiently.
Yeah.
They want to work with the minimal amount of effort possible. And that CIA triangle, the availability side of it, gets a lot of tension and a lot of pushback. So I think we're not quite there in practice, but we all know that we should be doing it.
Convenience is always at odds with security, almost always. Unless you really pull off the miracle cure that has the convenient and secure, that's the holy grail.
Yep.
What about companies that have insurance? I remember cyber insurance was a big thing for a long time, and then I heard or read stories about companies being targeted specifically because they were aware that they had cyber insurance because they knew they would be able to pay, and probably because you had cyber insurance, you had. Oftentimes, they had facilitators at the insurance companies that would help, moderate this with the bad guys. Where does that stand today?
In my opinion, insurance companies are the VC capital, the venture capital investors of ransomware. They are the ones that have been driving it this whole time, because when a ransomware operator pops a box, the first thing they look at is insurance policy. That's one of the first things that they search. They search passwords and they search insurance policy. So
wow.
It's very sad, because as they've started paying out, that is when we saw it get operationalized. They literally funded it.
Wow. How ironic is that? Wow. Okay. So today, how are most companies infected by malware and ransomware? What is the way in? What's the current favorite thing du jour? Phishing? Is it BEC, the business email compromise? What are the favorite attacks today?
Yeah, I mean, phishing's still at the top of the list by every report that I've read.
Okay.
And they're utilizing AI. So like just the past year or so, I've noticed the attacks are crafted more sophisticated. Like they're more sophisticated in the crafting of it. It's more believable. There was a lot of thought that was put into it. And I gather that is from AI. And the language has been less broken English, less misspells, less grammatical errors, and very thoughtful and targeted. So like the scenarios are out of the box. I love how an attack is not necessarily high in sophistication, but it was so out of the box that no one would have ever thought of it. And I think happening now, they're using AI to come up with these scenarios that are very effective and very believable, and people are clicking links.
Like what? Like, can you give me an example?
I don't know if it's really an out of the box one, and I'm trying to. I don't want to. My company's watching this, so I don't want to reveal anything that
right
was company related. I guess targeting security operations. So clicking on a phishing link that's more likely for a sysadmin or security operations that is trained to look for threats, and they're slipping through the cracks because it looks legitimate, they're putting malware payloads on the unsubscribe link. So like you get spam, and then you click unsubscribe, boom, there's a payload. Wow. And you're like, I was just clicking unsubscribe. Or they're putting it like on the report. So like you click report. So things that a sysadmin would do on a regular basis without really evaluating where that link is going, they're utilizing that technique. Sending here information about webinars, whatever product that you're using, they're targeting. So they'll do a fingerprint of the company and they get a list of all the products that you're using, and they create a phishing attack targeted, that looks exactly like it came from that company, targeting a SOC analyst or a sysadmin user,
Well, with AI, it's almost limitless what you can do. I mean, if I knew the CEO, for example, or if I could look up someone in the board and I could see they're going to be giving a talk in 3 months at some conference, feed in some of the recent LinkedIn posts and say, come up with something plausible for why I might want to contact this person, right?
And that's exactly what's happening.
That is crazy. So how should companies be educating their employees to protect against these kind of attacks? I know that when I was in Cisco, and I heard, from what I hear now that I've retired, it's still getting worse, where the company sends out fake phishing emails to see who they can get to bite. And if you bite, sometimes they shame you. Sometimes they just say, well, next time, don't do this. Do those work? And if not, or either way, what other kind of things, what kind of education can you really give your employees to try to protect against this kind of stuff?
Yeah, and I think you're not going to get rid of the training, because there's statistics out there that shows that it works, and plus they're favored by insurance companies.
Sure,
you get lower premiums. It also shows due diligence, due process, whatever, for as long as you're doing you're taking reasonable efforts to secure the organization, and you have a formalized training program with simulated phishing links, it's more like it holds up more and makes you look good in court. It looks good in better appearance, looks good on audits. It's security theater, is my opinion.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's a. I don't like the shaming of employees. I don't like being, putting them into training jails. I would like to see more of a collaborating environment. I would like to maybe incentivize the spots for the click. So you incentivize it, like maybe building teams with departments saying, hey, whatever team spots the most phishing things, they're going to win like free pizza, or they're going to win, some time off. Like make it a positive thing, not just a mundane, I've got to do my training thing, but make it like a competition where everybody's looking for phishing because they want to get a higher score for the department. Something like that. Something that makes it like more of the camaraderie, and produces collaboration. It's the collaboration piece, I think, that will make the training effective. If everybody is sharing, hey, I think this is a phishing link. What do you think about this? Oh, no, it might be, and it is. And then you blast it to like a group. So like a group chat or something like that. And everybody kind of studies it, or you spin up a meeting right away and you look at it. That way you get the training on the latest tactics of something that's authentic and real, that's really targeting you. And if the IT team or the security team can partner with that and says, okay, let's go, let's detonate this link, let's see what happens, and then show everybody and make it real, make it real for everybody. And in that kind of environment, they're going to be more open to actually sharing what they clicked if a real event happens. And that's the behavior that we want to encourage. We want to produce the kind of behavior of see something, say something. They might take time to say something if they're afraid of being scolded, if they're afraid of being reprimanded. But if there's already a rapport that's there, they're like, hey, I clicked the link, guys. This is what it is. Let's help me out here. And they're going to respond quick, and the reports will be quick. And it's always, companies always catch the attack early when the user reports it. And that's who we need. Security is everyone's job. And if everybody's on board and collaborates, we can catch it fast.
And one of the things I've often heard is that well, first of all, it's always good to just stop, take a second, think about it. Like, okay, how likely is it that the CEO would just send me this thing and tell me to pay it, or to ship him money because, via wire transfer, or, there's some weird ones, but taking that time to A, think about it, then B, just check, like take a different channel. Like, I just got an email from you. Was this really from you? But send it via text, or in case that person's email was compromised. Like, just take that 1 second step to verify before following through.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of challenge words. I think we should have pre-established challenge words to where we can say, hey, where did we first meet? Or what did you say your dog's name was? And something to where it's already pre-established and that you can make those checks. Because now with AI, you literally can't believe what you see or hear. So if you hear the CEO's voice on the phone, it may not be him. If you see a video call in Teams, it may not be him.
Yep.
So we've got to actually have these checks.
That's been done.
It's been done, like something $50 million, and they thought it was the CEO asking the finance guy to transfer the money. But yeah, I mean, this is the day and age, and this is where I've already got the pre-established challenge words with my kids. If someone comes to the school and says, hey, Dad told me to pick you up, you need to be able to ask what the challenge word is. And it's a dance, so it's not even a word. It can't be written down. So
you know what? I've actually done that with my kids too. That was something I heard as well. So it's really interesting to hear someone else say that. But I think the other takeaway here is that it's really hard. Like, these things are tricky. And I have seen I follow a lot of big time security people, and I've heard one or two of them say, hey, I just got burned. And, I do this for a living, and they got me. So you shouldn't feel any shame. Some of these campaigns are really, really tricky. And so what else can we do, like, from a technical perspective? What are some of the things that we could do at the IT department level, or solutions maybe we could purchase that would help us poor humans to resist some of these attacks?
Yeah, that's, I've been thinking about a world that has no emails for a long time, and I've read a few posts and wrote a couple posts, and we always seem to just revert right back to email. And I wish there was another way to do business other than email. I mean, there's in person, there's over the phone, but it's just not very efficient. So something that's other than email, that's equally efficient or more.
What about like
know.
messaging systems like Slack or Teams or something for all internal communications, and then leave email for external?
Yeah, that could be one, so that you reduce the attack surface from the external.
Right, and then maybe you might more automatically suspect something in an email. It's because you know that if it's emailed from outside the company, and maybe you could even put more strict controls on that since you're not worried about internal. I don't know.
Maybe, but then how do you do that for customers? If you have
right,
vendor relationships, you bring them in
Right.
your Slack channel, or I don't know. It's a tough
Well,
one.
as if it wasn't bad enough, after the pandemic, a lot of us worked from home, and a lot of us still want to stay at home even after the pandemic, which is a whole other issue. But it's now a thing. It's in modern business life. There's a lot of people that work remotely, even if they could go in the office, even if it's just sometimes part time during the week.
Right.
What were some of the challenges that arose from people working from home, and then kind of along with that, and also a BYOD, bring your own device, is a new thing. In the old days, the company would issue you a company phone, and then the company would have full control over that phone, and you probably carried two. But today, everyone just has their own phone. So how do you address those challenges? Because obviously that would definitely open up new avenues of attack.
Yeah, and it does. Ever since users moved at home, but the cloud resources, the company resources moved to the cloud. So now there's nothing behind the firewalls anymore. So there's nothing like the company resources aren't behind the firewall. The users aren't behind the firewall. They might be on a VPN, but their other traffic is usually split tunneled going out their own internet network at home.
Yeah.
So even with company devices, there's a challenge because users are at home, still has access to the full internet. BYOD brings more problems because there's privacy issues and the company can't collect or control any of that information. So that's a big security gap that's there. But also when it comes to incident response, there's a limited ability to even collect the artifacts that you need to perform a full investigation because of BYOD. But you also have, like what's trending right now is Stealer malware, and the user will put a plugin in their browser because they want to get shopping coupons or whatever. But that thing was rewritten with malware to look at their passwords inside their browser. And so now, they collect that information, they put it on the dark web, and their corporate credentials are being exfiltrated and put on the dark web. And so these browser plugins will infiltrate over to company devices because they'll log in with the user account that syncs their browser from their infected home computer. And now they got an infected corporate computer. And so
So what can you do about that? Did you just have to say no to the employees, like you can't use this, you can't use that, and put a lot of policies on their Windows PC machines that don't allow these things? What do you do?
Yeah, I mean, there's software that's out there to containerize like your browser, and the corporate environment can control whatever's in that browser. So if you are an organization who can afford that software in the first place, or has a risk that needs to be mitigated that will afford the cost of that software. And if you have all your applications in the SaaS world, so if you have all SaaS applications and the user only uses the browser, they'll log into this container browser and everything that's inside there will be controlled by the company's firewalls, by the policies. They even have stuff that watermarks whatever stuff. So if you try to take pictures of things, it's like watermark, so you can trace it if it's ever exfiltrated. But yeah, they do have technology like that, but it's very expensive, and I think only the big Fortune 100s, 500s would be able to afford that. I don't know what you would do with the small businesses. Small businesses are it's very tough to do that, and it's almost like you move over to the right of the attack chain. So like there's left of boom where you have all these prevention measures, and then you have the right of boom where you just have your response. And companies are just opting to saying, you know what? I'm just going to focus on the response because I can't afford to be secure. I literally can't afford the resources to be secure. So I'm just going to focus on just responding. I'm going to make sure that I have my incident response plan. I'm going to make sure I have my cyber insurance. I'm going to make sure I have all my T's crossed and I's dotted so that I just, will avoid liability. And it's just because that's the business is there to make money. It's not there to focus on all these security efforts.
Right. Yeah, that is a real trick. It's hard to, in some cases, to justify the cost of all the security privacy stuff because it doesn't contribute to your bottom line at all.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and yet it gets even more complicated because today, especially, all of our companies are all interconnected. They're all interdependent, and any single company can depend on several other companies. There's supply chain, like physical products that you might need to make what you're making. And then there's managed service provider. A lot of, especially small companies who can't afford an IT department or can't afford an accounting department or a payroll department, farm a lot of this stuff out. And so therefore they are now dependent usually through some software program or perhaps through hardware they have embedded in their thing or a cloud service they depend on. And we've all seen in recent years how devastating those kind of supply chain attacks can be where something you as a business depend on is compromised. So again, I ask, as a business owner, what can I do to protect my company and then ultimately my customers from third parties that I depend on?
Yeah, you have to have an accurate inventory, and that's the number one piece. So have everything documented on a document you can refer to, and list out all the access to those SaaS applications, software that you have, each of the hardware that supports that, each of the users who have access to that, what is their level of privilege on that, how often are the passwords rotated, and have everything in a document. The document is the one that's important because it shows that you're thinking about security. And there's these safe harbor laws, and that's coming out. I think there's 3 states that have adopted it, but there's more and more that are adopting it. And if you follow a best practice or take reasonable efforts to secure your business, you'll be indemnified from either high lawsuit fees or be indemnified altogether. Just you get to walk away. So from a personal business liability portion of it, if you're taking reasonable efforts and you've taken thought to it, you can even map out like, hey, we considered a full-blown IDS solution. We full-blown MDR. We've done the research on this. Here's the cost. Here's the risk. We decided not to do it. Even if as long as you've documented the process that yes, we did consider an attack like this, and we opted not to do it because we simply can't afford it, or it would disrupt our business operations, or it would require this. If you mapped it out, that's the important piece. So as a small business owner, you have to have a document that identifies what you thought about and what you've considered and the decisions that you made either to continue or not continue. And that diagram is very important. It holds up well in court. And so in addition to that diagram, you have to create processes, and you need to create the processes of like how you create users, how the users get trained before acquiring credentials. You have a process for investigations. You have a process for responding to incident response. And again, all of this helps in the eyes of the court because you are taking reasonable efforts to do what you can, because the truth is you can't stop it. But if you've made reasonable efforts and you've documented it, that really, really helps.
This sounds to me like an ISO thing, an ISO kind of a procedure or a NIST procedure. Do you have off the top of your head, are there accepted best practices or playbooks that people could go and find right now on the web?
So CIS controls is one, and you refer to that framework and you identify the most important things that are most likely to stop attacks. And if you implement CIS controls, I think your effectiveness of stopping a breach exceeds 70%.
Oh, wow.
So you can actually be more successful, implementing these controls. And if you are popped, you have a 70% chance or greater of actually stopping the threat just by implementing those controls. There's also Marsh's top 12 controls. And again, if you follow these controls, if you follow these frameworks, again, that looks good for safe harbor.
You already mentioned IDS, so I want you to define what that is. And we talk a lot about prevention, but as you've just said, a lot of companies are like, you know what, I can't afford all this protection, so therefore I'm going to look at detection and interdiction maybe, or maybe just straight up remediation after the fact. Like, what's an IDS? How does that work? How do I, are they expensive? And does it make sense for companies to invest in something like this?
Yeah, so IDS is going to be looking at something of known threats. It's going to be looking at signature based, but a lot of threats are coming from 0 days. They're coming from unknown threats. So the effectiveness of IDS is not very high. Your ROI is not very high because they're very noisy and you need staff that's trained to be able to look and investigate that. But what's going to drive it is the compliance or regulations that the business is subject to. And they still, in insurance policies and whatnot. So it still makes sense for a business to get it because it checks a box for the compliance requirement or for the lower insurance premium. But in my opinion, it provides little value because attacks have advanced to evade IDS. And it's rather trivial to do so.
Wow. An intrusion detection system, an IDS, is it like an automated forensics thing? Is it looking for weird traffic? Is it looking for something on your computer that's all of a sudden encrypting all your files? Like what does an IDS do? How does it trigger?
Yeah, so it's going to look for indicators. It's going to look for signatures that are known. So like this IP address is known to be bad, block it. This hash of a file that's being transferred through, block it. It's going to be things that are what MITRE ATT&CK calls the bottom of the pyramid. It's the bottom of the pyramid of pain that are rather trivial to change. And so if you look at signatures, file hashes, domain names, IP addresses, and then all the way at the top, you have the tactics and techniques. And for attackers to change the bottom of the pyramid is trivial. So investing money on things that focus on the bottom of the pyramid, they don't have much ROI. There's not much effectiveness in actually stopping the threat.
This sounds like antivirus on steroids, but it sounds like the old antivirus was always looking for signatures because in the old days, things move more slowly. And it's like, okay, we have a list of all the malware we know about. So if I see that again, I can block it. Whereas more modern stuff is more heuristics and maybe AI, if we want to start throwing that word around, where it starts actually trying to react or be more smart about things, recognize more patterns or behavior.
Right. But plus it's also because like the landscape has changed. So not all the users or company resources will be behind the IDS. So you're going to have to put an IDS in front of each person's or each employee's home. You got to put it in the cloud where the resources are. They're just not behind it. And now everything's moving over to XDR. Like it was EDR and then it became MDR and then managed MDR and now XDR and then managed XDR. But that's where everything is headed because the telemetry is coming from servers and hosts and cloud applications and website applications and cloud servers and users that are home. So now they ingest this all into a central repository and they're looking at everything, not just IOCs, but they're looking at behavior-based stuff. They're looking at anomalies. They're looking at beaconing that's happening over a small period of time, over a large period of time. They're looking at the amount of data that's transferred, the time that it was transferred, or any kind of deviation and baseline of what the user usually accesses.
Right.
There's a concept of like how when you drive your car, it's very different than when a thief who just jacked your car drives your car. So the way that a user uses their account has a certain behavior, and when their account gets popped, that behavior changes, and they may not be doing anything apparently malicious, but the behavior looks different than how they're using it. And these kinds of advanced cyber tools are able to detect that deviation and say, hey, investigate this, prioritize this investigation because there's something up with this user.
All right, so let's go to the back end now. So this is right of boom, as we say. So once I've decided that my systems have been compromised, How do I determine the extent of the damage done? Like, what kind of forensics do I look for? What can I learn from them? And then what the heck do I do? I mean, at what point do you know that, okay, I just have to re-image this system? Or, you know, some attacks are pretty nasty as far as what they could do to your machine. And it's hard to trust them after the fact. So what do you do after the fact?
Yeah, so it really depends on what type of attack it is and what type of asset it is and the level of impact. Also, it depends on what the business's goals are. So in either case, scoping is like the most important. You've got to determine the blast radius. You've got to know if it's a user's account that was popped. You got to know what was the goal, and are there other accounts affected. So if the goal of the attacker was to do some sort of financial phish of an adjacent organization or one of the vendors, or to utilize that user's account as a method of trust to access and trick another organization, if that was the goal, then we wouldn't carry the investigation over to local malware. We probably wouldn't look at other systems. We may want to check other email accounts. So it would depend on what the goal of the attacker was. So that's the first thing. So, and you need to determine scope. You need to know how many affected users or affected devices are a part of the blast radius. So if the goal of the attacker was actually, drop inside the environment, if they're a nation state and you kind of know what they do next in terms of their tactics, then that's where your investigation goes. And then you're going to want to start determining scope of, if malware got dropped on that user's box, now you're going to be looking at that signature for anything popping on any box in the entire environment. So you're going to be searching hashes across the whole environment, and you're going to start thinking, okay, what is the attacker going to do next? And that drives the investigation and can determine scope. Because if it's not properly scoped and you don't know what the blast radius is in the beginning, you could end up start responding and restoring systems, and then the attacker is still here with the back door. And you didn't properly scope it. So this all depends on what the priority of the business is as well. So if their priority is to just bring up operations, like if it's a manufacturing company, they just want to get everything up. They don't care who it is. They don't care what the scope is. They just want to get things running because it's millions of dollars a minute.
Yeah.
To that extent. And so investigations will be cut short. They will be less likely to perform full-blown digital forensics. Now, if it's a government location, they're going to prioritize attribution. So they're going to prioritize, who is this? Like, is this China? Is this Russia? And so they're gonna be slow to respond. They're gonna be slow to even stop the attack. So they're gonna try to move it over to honeypots or kind of contain the network without letting the threat actor know that they've been seen. And they're gonna let them dwell in there because they're gonna collect intel. They want to collect the tactics. They want to know who it is, how they work, and this information they take and they use that to go look for similar attacks in other government agencies. So that's their priority. So it would really just depend on what type of business it is, what type of attack it is, and what their priority is.
So incident response is a big buzzword in the industry, and if you're at a big enough company, you might have a whole team assigned to doing these sorts of things. I know at Cisco we did. Smaller teams, obviously, or smaller companies probably don't have the budget or the luxury for that. Let's say I'm more of an average business, not a government, and I've got customers, and my customers' data is potentially at risk at being exposed through ransomware, or because ransomware used to be about locking up your stuff and then paying to get it back. And if you had backups, maybe you'd be okay. Now it's a lot about not only doing that, but also exfiltrating the data so that you can hold that for ransom as well and threaten to leak it.
Double ransom.
So, and I know currently in the United States, I believe there's all sorts every state has their own data breach notification rules. As a company, what do I need to be thinking about in terms of when do I need to notify my customers, either business customers or end users like myself, that where their data might be at risk? What happens when that comes into play?
So I think it's important to utilize the cyber insurance breach coach. The cyber insurance breach coach should be the first call in that event, because they'll be able to give you legal advice to the notification laws that you're subject to and what is the most up-to-date information, because that changes. And depending on your organization, if you're subject to SEC or if you're subject to, CISA regulations, then you got to keep up to date on that.
Yeah.
It's important to have a template ready so that you don't have to think of the words that you're going to say. So it's already pre-vetted by executives that you're going to say this in a way, spin it if you have to. I mean, that's kind of like what they're going to be focused on. I'm a big fan of transparency. I think transparency will actually buy you a lot more creds, street creds. And I think, FireEye and CrowdStrike are great examples of good transparency. And I applaud them for being upfront and for responding to things quickly. But I think, having that communication template pre-prepared so that you could just fire it off when you need to, have established roles of people that are going to be responsible for doing that, I think that's going to be key.
So what do you think about things like doing tabletop exercises or incident planning where you actually, all right, we're going to get together for a company retreat this weekend and we're just going to go through and here's what happened. How do you respond? It's like the old fire drills that you do that dad does with the kids at the house. We're doing a pretend fire drill and then we're going to have pizza. What do you think about tabletop exercises? Yeah.
You don't want the first time to be during an actual attack. So you want to practice the attack and at least see where your gaps are. And tabletops, I mean, I think they should be done monthly. I know it's very hard to get executives to commit to monthly training, but you gotta have everybody together and all the stakeholders so that you can see because when you run through the scenario and say, okay, this is a scenario, where do we go from here? Okay, Teams, email are unavailable because of ransomware. How do we communicate with each other?
Right.
Well, we don't have a plan. Okay, well, we should probably subscribe to a secondary method of communication. We should probably have a backup. And how do we identify that we're actually talking to the person, that it's not the threat actor that popped in our network? That's another thing we have to practice. But so you've got to have it into muscle memory. You've got to have it to where you've practiced it so many times, you already know what to do. You don't want the first scenario to be, okay, let me dust off this incident response plan from 2010. All right, well, so-and-so's not here anymore. So-and-so's not here anymore. This number has been disconnected. We changed carriers and this one, you don't want that to happen.
Right.
So it needs to be practiced often enough to where everything is updated and everybody knows what their role is and you can go through the drill and contain it fast because that's the point.
So you had mentioned talking to the first call should be to your cyber insurance fixer, whoever your contact is. My understanding is, unlike maybe health insurance and home insurance, you can't actually quote unquote buy insurance after an incident just for the support part of it. Is that true? Where you could you don't have their insurance, so they're not going to maybe pay your money, but you could also approach these people to help you with the incident response. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, so the insurance companies will have access to digital forensic incident response companies, and a lot of these companies will actually perform work on a $0 retainer basis. So you may be able to subscribe to the insurance to gain access to the digital forensics company who just charge you the hourly rate at the discounted price agreed with the cyber insurance, and so that's kind of a way that they get access to those services and not have it to be such a high dollar amount.
This has got to be overwhelming for just about anybody that's trying to run a business or running an IT department if they haven't considered this stuff yet. So as we wrap up here, what are some helpful resources that you can recommend? I know from talking to other people that CISA has a program, I believe it's even free, where you can say, hey, would you scan our systems periodically and let me know what you see? Tools like Shodan, they're free, where you can kind of scan yourself. And then you maybe NIST guidelines, you mentioned some others. What are some resources you can recommend for somebody, maybe even bug bounty programs? What do you recommend?
There are tools out there that can do that for you, but the really important thing is, do you have somebody who can actually respond to that? So if you subscribe to something that gives you a whole bunch of alerts, what are you going to do? Well, you need someone competent enough to be able to sift through those alerts and determine what's high priority and low priority based on what the impact is on specific assets that alert is affecting. So you need someone with some sort of knowledge, and you need a partner, maybe an MSP or an MSSP who can walk you through that, or you need a dedicated contact inside the company that's going to be able to respond to those things, because those tool offerings will produce a lot of noise and you'll get a lot of emails and a lot of alerts. The question is, what are you going to do when you get that? Are you going to do something, and do you have somebody who's going to take responsibility for that? But yes, CISA has free tools for critical infrastructure clients. So if you're like Department of Water, Power, something like that, one of the 16 of the sectors, they've got free tools. They can even put in sensors in your network. They can even do, threat hunting, and they have 24/7 SOC services that can do that. Also, if you're an education institution, there's also free tools like that. And I'll be happy to provide all these these links. CIS has a lot of stuff for education, local government, tribal government, rural cities. So I don't know about bug bounty programs. I don't know if you're a company who develops software, it might help to stand up a bug bounty program, but there's things like Bug Crowd that you can pay for that service. So you give them your code, and Bug Crowd is crowdsourced. So they'll have a whole bunch of bug bounty techs that are going to be digging into your code to look for bugs. And it's a crowdsourced version to be able to, secure your development. But I think after the Uber situation where they tried to do the cover up and they paid a bug bounty and disguised the ransom payment as a bug bounty.
Right.
And what happened to what happened to them at Uber, I think a lot of companies they shut down and paused their bug bounty programs because they didn't want to give that impression that that's what they were doing. And it looks, like how, and if a payment is made to someone, does that look like a cover up? I guess is what they were concerned with.
All right, and then finally, as regular people, which is probably most of my audience, just consumers and regular end users, do you have any advice for how we can choose and support companies that maybe take better care of our data? That from the outside, I would think it'd be kind of difficult for us to evaluate the security of any given company. But maybe on the other side are the red flags. Or there's something that obviously, if I look at that and I see a company's doing this or has a history of doing this, that I should avoid them. Yeah,
I think it depends on the offering. Like, when I look for a VPN tool, I look for, how do they do their logging? Where do they hold their keys? What is their process for complying with law enforcement? Or if it's like cloud storage, I look at what do they do with their keys, and can they see my files? Can I encrypt it on my end? They don't see it. And how do they respond to law enforcement? So I think it's depending on what the tool is, I think one red flag would be if it's free. If it's free, you're the product, stay away. Look at their transparency. Does it look like they're spinning? Does it look like they're not very transparent? And I like to look at their community involvement. Like, do they offer free stuff for the public? Do they do things for their community? Do they have a lot of activity on social media, like maybe Reddit or something like that? But I like to see them plugged in to the community around, and that goes positive for me.
All right, Oz, that was really interesting and obviously scary too, because it's rough out there. And so, but it's good to get a perspective on how difficult it is and understand that companies do make mistakes. Actually, that is something I wanted to mention for me, a lot of times it's not that they make a mistake or that they've been hacked, because that can happen to anybody. It really comes down to the response. How well did they respond to that? Were they transparent about what happened? Were they quick about telling you what happened, telling you what you can do? So that is something that I think we should be looking for when we're judging these things. Not that they make a mistake, because out there it's tough, as we've covered today. So anyway, thank you so much for coming on the show. That was very informative.
Awesome.
I think that was an important discussion. I was really happy to talk to Oz, and I think it was really good to get the perspective from the company defenders in today's cyber environment, because it's tough out there. It's really tough. The bad guys are smart. They are working together in a lot of cases. It's an organized crime thing, or it's a state actor kind of a thing. It's become a real industry, like to the part where there's specializations within the industry. There are people whose only job it is to get the initial break-in. They're the break-in artists. They're like the people that know how to crack the safe, or the people that know how to pick the lock. And then they turn it over to the people that are good at going in and getting data or encrypting the data. It's quite amazing. And the reason it's gotten to be such an established industry with all these different players and specializations is it's very profitable. So a couple quick follow-ups that I wanted to make from the interview. First of all, I do agree that free can be a red flag when you're looking at products. But I do want to qualify that from my perspective anyway. And that That is, there are business models where they give away like a light version of their product for personal use, but they make their money on corporate or enterprise products. That's fine with me. That's a valid business model. And some companies really do just give away products and services out of the goodness of their hearts. Now, they still need some sort of a valid funding model because this stuff does cost money, and that may be donations or a grant or something like that, or some rich person who likes to give money toward security stuff like Craig Newmark from Craigslist. That does happen. But more often, the free ones we're talking about are the ones that are laced with a ton of ads or have all sorts of weird upsells or, trying to get you to buy other products. That's usually a bad sign because they're obviously, it's not free to create this stuff, but they have to make money somewhere. And that's often by monetizing your data or being very annoying by trying to sell you other stuff and probably get a cut of those sales. So I want to sum this up this way. And we talked specifically about cybersecurity for companies, and certainly it was all about that. But at the end of the day, this is at a higher level. It's really about being prepared for any negative contingency in life, not just drafting a plan, but like knowing who's responsible for what, having resources lined up ahead of time, practicing it, refining it. If the consequences of it happening are bad and the likelihood of it happening is non-trivial, you should have a plan. And there are almost surely existing resources to help you do all of this. But a lot of these resources are often free. Sometimes they come from, the government, either the federal or the local government. Sometimes they come from nonprofit organizations like the EFF, or perhaps even one you've never heard of before. So if you're doing these things, do some web searching first before you, reinvent the wheel. And of course, it's kind of why I do what I do, right? This is what I'm trying to do with the podcast, with the blog, with the book, and so on. I'm trying to help you be prepared. So for those of you who might own a business or know somebody who does, some of the ones that he mentioned, I've put links to in the show notes. That's the Center for Internet Security Controls, the CIS controls. They've been around for a long time. Marsh's controls. These controls are just, I guess, that's a weird word for it, but these are best practices, things that you can and should be doing to protect your stuff. So check that out. There's links in the show notes if you want to look at those. And like I said in the intro, I wanted to mention that anybody can be tricked. Anybody. There are very smart people that I know that are in the cybersecurity business who have gotten hacked or who have gotten phished. In fact, since the interview, since I actually originally talked to Oz Jones, Troy Hunt, who runs the website Have I Been Pwned, was pwned. He was phished, successfully phished. And he was tired. He was jet lagged after a trip. I mean, there's a lot of times when we are not prepared. We're stressed out or we're rushed or we're really tired. And, we just go through the motions because we think we got to do something or something gets us upset and worried and we're not thinking straight and we follow through on it. And we could be hacked. It could happen to anybody. I may actually cover his particular story next week, but, I'm always kind of pressed for time. So just in case I don't get to it, there is a link to his blog article about this, which is very worth reading. So anyway, prevention is important, but so is remediation. So having plans in place for how to respond when bad things happen is a smart thing to do. And I've actually got some ideas for some blogs and some interviews coming up kind of around that topic explicitly. So stay tuned for those. And on Thursday, of course, the patrons will be getting their bonus content, little bonus Q&A with Oz. We talk about a couple of topics. He wrote an article, or I think maybe it was a post on LinkedIn, about how China as a country approaches cybersecurity training, which is pretty amazing, actually. Very different from how we do things here and how we might improve things here. We talk about how you could use things like capture the flag tournaments to teach yourself about cybersecurity and even land yourself a well-paying job. In fact, if you're in high school, even middle school, or if you know someone who has some sort of an inclination for cybersecurity stuff, that's a great way to get started. We talk about how important communication skills are for somebody who's in cybersecurity and some of the other things that are not just directly technical. And then finally, I ask him, kind of a juicy one, I ask him whether he thinks that there are potential national or cybersecurity implications for the virtual chainsaw that Elon Musk's Doge team is taking to several U.S. agencies. And we have an interesting little discussion about that. So anyway, Patrons as usual, but we'll get that bonus content on Thursday. And by the way, for new patrons, if you're considering, new patrons will get access to the entire back catalog of bonus content once you sign up, which right now is approaching about 200 different episodes. So lots of good stuff there. Next week, of course, we'll have a news show. And then again, lots of great interviews in the pipeline. We'll be talking with Zach Edwards, who's often quoted in articles about data breaches and things. My interview with Debbie Reynolds, the Data Diva, is coming up soon, as is my interview with the founders and husband and wife team of ShmooCon, Heidi and Bruce Potter. That was a lot of fun. And lots more. Cory Doctorow and several other ones coming up. So again, subscribe if you haven't, then you won't miss any of that. That'll do it for this week, everybody. Take care, stay safe out there, and until next week, as always, don't get caught with your garbage down.